as the first woman ever in this role. Signora Albanese is an affiliated scholar at the Institute for the Study of International Migration at Georgetown University, as well as a senior advisor on migration and forced displacement for a think tank, ARDD. She has widely published on the legal situation in Israel and the state of Palestine, and regularly teaches and lectures on international law and forced displacement at universities in Europe and the Arab world. Probably you have followed the news in the German papers in the last couple of days, even before this conference. I just want to quote from Bild-Zeitung a couple of months ago, UN-Beauftragte mit übler Judenhetze. That was written in der Bild-Zeitung. Or Ralf Balke in der Jüdischen Allgemeinen vor 5 Tagen. It's a Jewish newspaper. I quote in German. Nun kann man durchaus das israelische Vorgehen kritisieren, aber mit solchen Topoi, die zum Teil nach dem ganz kleinen Einmaleins des Antisemitismus klingen und sich ebenso in rechtsextremen Milieus großer Popularität erfreuen, hat man sich eigentlich für ein akademisches Umfeld disqualifiziert. Da kann man sich ja gleich Beatrix von Storch oder Björn Höcke einladen. Sagt ein Historiker der Uni Leipzig. Umso mehr freue ich mich. I am even more pleased to welcome you, Francesca, that despite all these verbal attacks, you were ready to come to Munich and talk to us. The floor's yours.
I think this is really the only word I know in Germany. So thank you very much. I understand that you do not agree with what was just read. And the thing is that I don't read this stuff, not just because it's in German, but I'm serious. And it's very, look, as an Italian, and we will unpack it later, I cannot tell you how much I've suffered. And I'm suffering with cramps in my stomach when I was told the first time that I'm an anti-Semite. Because in my country, people like my own family who raised me, being told anti-Semite is a scar. And not because of what people think, but for what anti-Semitism is. It is revolting, it is disgusting, and it's appalling that it still exists in this part of the world. And instead of dealing with it, instead of dealing with the root cause of anti-Semitism, people in this country, I don't think they're stupid. They perform stupidity. And avoid seeing the injustice today like 100 years ago. But we'll get there. That was rude. I should have said thank you for inviting me. Munich Peace Conference. And I'm also very pleased to continue this discussion after my remarks and Gershon's remarks. I'm very happy to be on a panel with Gershon Baskin because I'm sure that in another language he has read pretty much the same things about me, so it's quite courageous to be sitting with someone who sees the devil. So, as we meet here tonight, the international legal order starts at the edge of a precipice. Palestine, Israel, whatever you like to call it, lies at the center of this collapse, both as a cause and as a consequence. And I would like to convey through these remarks 3 points. First, that peace premised solely on security is misguided, as evidenced by the situation in Palestine. Second, imperialism is today showing its true face, and we can see it. And it's necessary to see it, because only by seeing it we will be able to address it robustly and coherently. And third, that international law can serve as the antidote to these challenges and in the pursuit of an ethical peace, with all of us having a vital role to play in this pursuit. So let's start with why security alone, premising peace upon security alone is misguided. In a world that has become increasingly polarized, a peace conference like this one is more crucial than ever. Nonetheless, for many, the focus remains on a state-centric conception of security, with war at its center. A seemingly perpetual state of conflict that politics either actively pursues or fail to avert, as evidenced by the emphasis of the conference, the other conference that is going on. And it's taking this all the spotlight away from you. They call it security. But security for whom? Is it the security of all the people, all of us, or just a select few? Is it the security of states, or some states in particular, and their political and financial interests? And Palestine here is a case in point. Security has been used to justify the intentional, progressive, incremental destruction of a people as a whole. In Palestine, peace has become a meaningless word used to mask decades of low-intensity ethnic cleansing, annexation, apartheid, and racial discrimination. These policies have brutally accelerated over the past 15 months and will not stop unless and until they will be actively opposed. Israel has been emboldened, meanwhile, to violate international law with impunity for decades, while Palestinians have endured unimaginable suffering and injustice in their existential struggle to avoid permanent erasure. Over the last 30 years, peace has been a facade for these atrocities. And on my way on this conference, I took a note. Palestine exposes the fragility of peace when premised upon the security of some at the expense of the rights of an entire people, often in the pursuit of unlawful goals. Right now, the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, namely, whatever of historical Palestine, Israel didn't become Israel in 1948. So the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And this is what the territory that I'm mandated by the Human Rights Council as a special rapporteur to report on. Well, the situation there is catastrophic. The violence, displacement, and violations of international law continue unchecked. Every measure that's justified in the name of security has come at the expense of Palestinians' lives and dignity. In the last 15 months alone, 70% of Gaza has been turned to rubble. 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed by Israeli bombs, artillery, and snipers. I mean, in this part of the world, sometimes I think if I said 50,000 dogs, people would register more. 50,000 Palestinians do not register with many people in this part of the world. And this number doesn't capture the many still undiscovered under the rubble and the many others who have died or will die due to the lack of medical treatment, hygiene, and adequate sustenance, or in Israeli jails, because you know that there are no more universities, the health system has been completely decimated because it's been bombed or has been destroyed or has been raided. Even when you have the buildings still standing, the Israeli soldiers have made sure to destroy every machinery that the people in Gaza had. With the ceasefire, we need to ask ourselves, is what we see in Gaza can really be called a premise to peace? Because since the beginning of the ceasefire, over 300 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza alone. only 1/3 of the agreed upon aid has been allowed to enter Gaza, 10% of the tents, and no mobile homes. So the Palestinians are still roaming around among the rubble and the waste and the bodies left to rotten, etc., and unexploded ordnance. The scale of the crime is known to all of us and has been known to all diplomacies in the world, including Germany, for a long time. At any other moment, though, all this would have raised alarm and international condemnation. Today, as I said, it doesn't register with us. Palestinian remains invisible. For years, the rallying cry in international diplomacy regarding Palestine has been negotiate peace. And yet, the approaches taken often reflect international decisions rather than mere ignorance or hypocrisy. For 30 years, the dominant strategy has involved endless negotiations, often framed around economic development, or treating the situation as a perpetual crisis, often a humanitarian crisis to manage instead of a political disaster to resolve in line with international law. Meanwhile, the land, resources, dreams, and aspirations of an entire people living under military rule, no matter the limits of autonomy granted by the occupation to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, or to what it was, the de facto authority, still the de facto authority in Gaza, Hamas, this notwithstanding. But mind you, not the security of the Israeli people, when everything has been sacrificed in the name of Israel's security. But mind you, not the security of the Israeli people in the land taken from the non-Jewish people of Palestine 75 years ago, which we now call Palestinians, and which constitute modern-day Israel, which is a protected member of the United Nations. Little that remains to the Palestinians rather than security of its never satiated annexation plans, in the little that remains to the Palestinians to exercise what is international consensus has agreed to be the territorial unity over which the Palestinians have an exclusive right to exercise self-determination in the form of an independent statehood. Indeed, the policies promoted in the occupied Palestinian territory have sidelined any form of reckoning on the imbalance between Israel and the Palestinians. And you can call it conflict, but you will be misled if you don't qualify, if you don't fully understand that this is not conflict, a conflict between two parties. And the relationship is a very asymmetric one. It's between the occupying power and the occupied, between the colonizer and the colonized, because it's not ideological what I'm saying. Advancing control over the land, taking the resources that are recognized as the right to be enjoyed by another people is the hallmark of settler colonialism. So if Israel doesn't want to be pointed at as a settler colonial state, it should not behave as a settler colonial state in 2025. Despite this asymmetry, which has been conveniently disregarded by the international community, Palestinians have been expected to negotiate the de facto conditions of their occupation, forced to drawing the lines of their own cell, as someone has said, while also coping with the low intensity and high intensity violence, apartheid and racial discrimination that have emanated from Israel's settler colonial project. And today, after 60 months of genocidal assault on Gaza, which is leaking out into the West Bank, peace in the Holy Land, even a simple absence of conflict appears even more fragile due to the depraved plans of the US presidency, which amplify the criminal agenda of Netanyahu's government. While this is shocking, it is not surprising, and this is the essence of imperialism. When confronted with the deliberate human-made catastrophe in Gaza, The discussion regarding the possibility that this might constitute genocide remains a contested one, particularly in what we call the West. At most, we see broad recognition that Israel has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, which are horrible things to do anyway. But such framings that Israel has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity against the Palestinians reflect, this is not new, and this reflects no more than what Palestinians have endured for decades before the current escalation. So let me pause for a second and explain what is genocide. Because especially in this country, like in my own country, and trust me, while somewhat you have wrongly, but you have processed what you have done, the Italians have lived with it. And indeed, this is why probably this has also facilitated the resurgence of right-wing forces. And no, because you have that too, not only it. So the problem is the same. So genocide is, what constitutes genocide is not defined by personal opinions, nor by personal histories, no matter, and regardless of how painful and horrific they are. What constitutes genocide is defined by international law. And it comes as a surprise to many in our part of the world that you can have genocide even if you don't have crematoria. And you can have genocide even if you don't have extermination, because in fact genocide is, according to the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, genocide is a series of acts that include killing, infliction of severe bodily or mental harm, creation of conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction, the physical destruction of the group in total or in part, or transfer of children and prevention of birth. So as you see, 1 out of 5 acts includes killing, and we'll come back to this. But what characterizes these acts as genocidal is the intent, what is called the mens rea, so the intention to destroy in whole or in part a group as such, a national, religious, ethnic or racial group. And this is the thing, it's not complicated to identify the genocidal intent when it's so obvious and it's so direct. It's complicated to find the intent because normally people don't go around inciting to commit genocide. And in 2025, you would expect that someone wouldn't create an online accessible archive with documenting genocidal statements and genocidal acts. But like many genocidal society, what the Israeli society, and I'm sorry to say that, but because there are so many Israelis who don't want this, so many Israelis who are against this, so many Israelis who are horrified because they stand firmly against occupation, apartheid and genocide. The majority of the Israeli society have called for the erasure of Gaza and have sustained a genocidal call, which is the destruction of a people as such. And you know, for the Palestinians, like for many indigenous people, the concept of the land is critical. This is why I'm saying it's not about killing them all. We have not killed them all. It doesn't matter. What you have done is enough. And might nonetheless lead to the death of many more. Because 50,000 people have been killed, but 200,000, according to the most authoritative medical journal in the world, The Lancet, might have died because of lack of access to a healthcare system. So those who had leukemia, cancer, or other curable diseases have died. Or think of the women who couldn't deliver in hospitals. Or think of the others who have gotten sick, or the malnourished kids and elderly. However, the question is that the reason why we do not understand genocide, what genocide is because of what many of us call colonial amnesia. I mean, your country has committed 2 genocides in the span of 30 years. And this, of course, the Jewish people, the Roma and Sinti, there were many others who have who have been killed, who have been exterminated, because they didn't conform to the idea of the superior race. And as my dear friend Raz Sigal, who's a very, very important Israeli scholar, a genocide scholar, so not Israeli, he's also Israeli, it doesn't matter, he's a genocide scholar. And he says, unfortunately, the idea of the superior race didn't die with Israel. And what I know is that it was not even conceived by Israel. This is something that we, Western society, need to deal with. 500 years of colonialism have left a huge, huge mark in our DNA. Racist we were, racist we are. And if we consider if we don't see that, the horrors of the past will not be a memory anymore. And this is my deepest fear. In this case, it is not just, in the case of Palestine, it's not just that genocide has been overlooked. Genocide has been justified, enabling Israel to continue it. And third states have evaded their responsibility under the Genocide Convention. And in this case, Germany is the valedictorian. Not even the case brought by Nicaragua at the ICJ against Germany has led to a review of its policies vis-à-vis Israel. You know, I think that ultimately the problem that we have in understanding the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians and the current genocide is that we do not easily understand what self-determination is. It's a very convoluted concept in our mind. But self-determination is very simple, in fact. It's the right of a people to exist as a people, to determine themselves as freely, not to be erased from a land, in fact to enjoy the resources that that land has. And it doesn't mean that self-determination has to manifest or to be realized necessarily as independent statehood. I mean, self-determination in international law was first and foremost protected as minority rights, so that minorities were not erased, but protected as different from the majority, but still having rights in the land where they were, to determine themselves according to their religion, tradition, etc. So, if we fail to recognize the fact that the Palestinians are still struggling for their existence as a free people under Israeli rule, clearly we cannot understand this genocide, because we have not seen what has happened during the 30 years of the negotiation. As they were negotiating, Israel has continued to build colonies. The colonies have tripled during the so-called peace process. And the genocide we witness today is a direct consequence, unfortunately, of this long trajectory of the Israeli colonial project in Palestine. The amnesia I was referring to surrounding European colonial history, which has led to the political shape and demographic whiteness of most of the current liberal democracies, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and it was South Africa, have forgotten what they've done in terms of as settler colonial powers in Latin America, Namibia, to the Aboriginal people in Australia, or the natives, the indigenous people, the Métis, the Inuit, the First Nations in North America. This denial is not accidental. The invisibility of past colonial victims is functional in sustaining current forms of colonialism and imperialism. And this is why Palestine today lays at the crossroad, at this intersection. Palestine, after being Israel's laboratory for decades, in the words of investigative journalist Anthony Lowenstein, that was already mentioned, and by the way, he has written a fantastic book, Laboratory Palestine, and there are four podcasts and two-part documentary, which is brilliant, and I really recommend it to everyone. It serves as a litmus test for examining these global infrastructures and interest. In the face of the devastation inflicted upon the land and its people in the occupied Palestinian territory, a minority of powerful states like Germany on whose soil we stand today, have shockingly provided military, economic and political support to Israel in the commission of its atrocities. Such actions reveal the scale of our collective struggle. Palestine highlights how colonial violence is not an instance of the past and it's enduring, and intertwines. When I say imperialism and capitalism, it's because, again, I know it might sound complicated, but look at the exploitation of natural resources. The role of arms proliferation, surveillance, technology, fossil fuel extraction in perpetuating and sustaining the domination of other people. This is the essence of empire. And we are so unused to think in these terms that we don't see it, even when it rises and becomes brutal, even when it shows its teeth, as it's happening these days in the United States. Palestine highlights how colonial violence intertwines with capitalism, especially through the exploitation of this resource. Sorry, I already told it. The conjecture has not been missed by many in the younger generation struggling for environmental justice, who see Palestine as central to their own struggle. And here's the last point I wanted to raise. Such a sad state of affairs, but must not deter us from seeking change from those who have the influence to act decisively. International law should be the cure to these horrors. International law and the mechanism to ensure enforcement and accountability do exist. But they, this is the bad news, depend on they depend on political will to defend and use them. And if politicians do not do what is necessary, it is the role of responsible citizens, civil society, academics, students, young people, journalists, anyone from all walks of life who have not sat idle in the face, who do not want to sit idle in the face of this grotesque injustice, to act as the antibody within a healthy rule of law system. International law says that in the face of an injustice, of an illegal act or a series of illegal acts, the responsibility of a state like Germany or a state like my own is not to recognize the illegal situation, not to recognize as legal the consequences of the illegal act. So, for example, the occupation has been declared illegal. We all knew. I mean, my predecessor and his predecessor, all special rapporteurs have pointed to Israel since 2005 as committing apartheid, but no one noticed. And practicing settler colonialism and maintaining an illegal occupation. Little by little, we have become more accurate, and Israeli human rights organizations have joined Palestinian human rights organizations in documenting it. Apartheid, and even now genocide, and still the world doesn't move. In the face of this, but again, now we have the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, that says the occupation is unlawful. Not because it commits violation of international law here and there, but because the very presence of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, so the West Bank, the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem, is to be dismantled because it violates the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. It precludes them the opportunity to live free as a people. And it amounts to apartheid and racial discrimination and apartheid, and leads to annexation, which is a form of aggression. So you see, it's a collection, it's a potpourri of crimes, in the face of which a state should not aid and assist. And so cattle ties that might lead to detrimental effects. So political ties have to be reviewed, economic ties, no trading with a state that commits illegal acts, and instead, everything has continued business as usual. The first settlement itself in 1967 should have been the trigger to change relations with Israel, and instead it has been tolerated, and impunity has become the rule instead of the exception. And today, Israel has committed and continues to commit genocide, despite what the German Chancellor thinks. The ICJ has affirmed, this is key. I do not expect any politician in this country to agree with me or with Amnesty International or with Israeli historians who have courageously pointed, and with great cost and suffering for them, to the fact that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. They do not have to believe us. But the International Court of Justice in January 2024 has recognized the plausible risk of genocide, and in another case, Nicaragua versus Germany, has reminded all states of their duty to ensure that weapons they export are not used to commit violations of international law, including genocide and war crimes. Your state cannot say that it didn't know what it was doing. And today we have to speak accurately and coherently in calling this what it is: a genocide, an unlawful occupation, apartheid, and act accordingly. Hope is a discipline, and it's a discipline that we must practice together. And the way forward to resolve the question, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in line with international law, is to end the genocide and the occupation and the apartheid. And I would close by saying, let there be justice for everyone. Sorry? Say it again? Okay.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for your clear and precise words. We have 20 minutes for discussion. Please shorten your question to 1 minute, 60 seconds, not longer, please. You can ask in German or in English. There are two persons moving around with microphones. Please. Hier vorne ist eine Handwendung. Ganz vorne, zweite Reihe. Ganz hinten sehe ich auch. Julia, ganz hinten meldet sich. Bitte.
Thank you, Francesca. I'd like to ask you about genocide being actually baked into the foundation of the Zionist race state. Basically, we know that establishing the supremacist race state on top of it, the expense of Palestine, could only be done via ethnic cleansing or genocide. It started with ethnic cleansing, but genocide was always in the cards. I do not see actually how it could not have turned out in that way, unfortunately. And I would like your opinion on that, and also the fact that the people of Gaza, the story of Gaza did not start in 1967, but rather in 1948 during the establishment of the Zionist race state.
Shall we take 3 questions and then I answer?
Okay. Ganz
So
hinten,
I
die
can
Dame.
accidentally forget one of the questions.
Hello. Hi, Francesca, it's really nice to receive you in Germany. I'm from the Democracy in Europe movement and the political party Mera 25. We're running in the reason I wanted to first introduce that is because we've been facing a lot of state repression from Germany, and you have yourself faced 2 cancellations here. And the last whole year has seen a complete dismantling of fundamental rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of movement, a lot of deportations. And my question is basically to ask you, what means do we have to hold Germany accountable at the Human Rights Council? I know about the Universal Periodic Review, but is there also other instruments that we as civil society can take to basically bring Germany to some accountability? And I say this because we have personally faced like a lot of cancellations of our events. We have faced political repression, and this is something that was unimaginable a year ago. So would just be interested to know what is out there that we can do. Woo!
Und wir nehmen noch die letzte Frage hinten. Ja, die Dame.
Hello, ich bin Tabitha Elkins. So I think I'll say this in English. Thank you for coming. It seems like the framing of this situation in Israel and Gaza follows either 2 narratives, and Netanyahu is always being seen as representing Israel, although he is one of the most unpopular leaders in the history of Israel. We also see the erasure of the peace movement and the Israelis who have been fighting against Netanyahu. We also see this false dilemma: either you're on the side of Hamas and terror, or you're on the side of imperialism and the settlers. How can we change the narrative so that we are given more than these 2 extreme visions? How can we change the narrative so that we can focus on the peace movement? And there are people like Combatants for Peace who are working towards peace. Peace activists were murdered on October 7th. I'm thinking of Vivian Silver, people like this. How can we change the narrative away from seeing violence and murder and genocide and oppression being without alternative? And how can we change the narrative so that we can see solutions and communication instead of just keeping up this dehumanization of either one side or the other side?
Thank you.
Gershon, I hope you don't mind taking in your Q&A also part of the questions that I will inevitably leave unanswered, because I'm not an expert either on Zionism or the reality inside Israel, but I will share nonetheless what I know. Because before being a special rapporteur, for example, on the first question on whether genocide is quintessential and was foreseeable since the arrival of Zionism in Palestine. Again, I think that there are persons who are more qualified than me to answer that question. However, what we know from history is that settler colonialism, which is the taking of a people's land, displacing them, and this is what settler colonialism is, and displacing them and taking their resources is something. This is the hallmark of settler colonialism, and in a number of cases, settler colonialism has led to genocide. There is scholarship that also points to the fact that Israel's settler colonialism is not like any other because of the link between the Jewish people and the land of historical Palestine. And that is fine. And I think it would have been not as problematic as it has been, because it has not been problematic in history, if all Jewish people who needed a safe haven, who needed refuge, because they were brutally persecuted in Europe, and not just during the period of the final solution. I mean, we often forget that the Holocaust didn't happen just in the concentration camp and in the crematoria. And then again, this is also something that I've revisited and I've studied better these past months. How many Jewish people were killed in the ghettos because they were left without adequate hygiene, food and medication? They were starved to death in concentration camps. So also, let me take an opportunity to say something, because again, as Germans, you have this attitude to say, we did it, and you did it. There is no question, as us, Italians, we did. And it's precisely and exactly because we did it that we need to feel ashamed, that we need to be alerted every time there is a risk that it happens to someone else. But let alone the Palestinians now. Do we see the racism that our cities and our countries are harboring against anyone? And now, while we focus on anti-Semitism as criticism of the state of Israel, and police officers around Europe beat up students who are just there, standing against justice. Please let me finish. I know that this is a friendly crowd, but we have important things to discuss. And I really want you to listen to me, because even you are not doing enough. And I'm serious. Because again, even if I'm only talking to that person who didn't want to come here because she was scared of being associated with Hamas. But in 16 months, why didn't you take a book and read a thing about Hamas? And not because I'm defending Hamas, but because if you knew what Hamas was, and Gershon, I really need you to talk about that. Because if I do, this will be, you see, she's an Hamas defender, she's an anti-Semite, she's justified. I'm not justified once the crimes that were committed against Israeli civilians, once. I've always condemned them. Because as a lawyer, as a human rights lawyer, I stand against any kind of violence against civilians. At the same time, what I've been wondering, not on October 7, 2023, because I was shocked like you. But shocked beyond what could say. I've been asking myself, how I'm going to talk about this anymore after all this violence. I didn't know. The only thing I've said as soon as I had a microphone in front of me was, what has happened is horrible, and I condemn all forms of violence that has been used against Israeli civilians. And this is the moment for the international community to pause and act with wisdom toward the Israelis and the Palestinians. Instead, what has been done, and this is why I say the war mentality is very dangerous. Everyone has gone to Israel saying, we stand behind you. Go, whatever you like. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I said something very important. Because here, either we see what is the danger. The danger, and here I have to say more than in other countries. In the last 10 days I've been to Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands. And the lack of courage that I sense in this country is very disappointing. Do you understand that the Holocaust was possible because the majority of us zipped their mouths and didn't do anything to prevent the normal individual, normal human being from ghettos and concentration camp? So this is what you have to ask yourself today. What am I doing to stop this? And there is no space for cowardice today. And when you watch Schindler's List, don't recognize yourself in Schindler unless you do something against it. So back to Zionism. Look, when you read the founding fathers of Israel, Jabotinsky, Herzl, Ben-Gurion, and I'm sure here there is someone who has read more than me. They talked about colonialism, and colonialism is ugly. So it's not me inventing things, it's not the anthropologists who have described Israel as a settler colonial endeavor. So accept it. The Jewish people did it in the mind of the founding fathers of Israel, the Jewish people didn't have to go as refugees or as migrants, but taking land and kicking out the Palestinians, the non-Jewish people of Palestine. And it has happened. In this sense, genocide, yes, has been the dormant gene of that project. And I wish we had intervened sooner. But what I want to say today is that what I hope is that this is really the last genocide of human history, and it will not be if we don't understand what genocide is and what are the obligations of a state. And when they are violated, and let me skip the second question because I want to go to the it's the second question. What we can do? First of all, educate ourselves. There are plenty of books. You don't want to read the Palestinians because they are too pro-Palestinians? Fine. Read Israeli scholars. Now it's fine. It's quite well known what has happened there are plenty of movies, of documentaries of what happened 8 years ago and what happens today. Document yourself and then educate your neighbor. And stand still in the face of denialism, in the face of obscurantism. You asked me, how do you feel that you have been cancelled by German university? I will relax. I've had 15 conferences in the last 10 days. I'm fine. The problem is yours. Because you live in a country. You live in a country that, again, where people are not stupid, but where people perform stupidity and look to me as your neighbor who took part in that with you. People look coward to me in this country. I'm sorry, but it's better. Among friends, I take the luxury of being brutally honest. So what can be done next? Speak out. Speak out and defend the defenders. Here, let's say the pro-justice, pro-human rights movement has been left pretty much alone, and it does include Palestinian people, ethnic German. Denmark, the UK, and the Netherlands now have cases for their state's responsibility in the crimes that Israel has committed in Gaza. And again, it's not just them. I'm currently looking at it's a monstrosity. It really I don't know where to end. I'm looking at the private sector, how military companies, the surveillance companies, AI, the tech industry is incredibly connected to that. But even the medical sector, pharmaceutical sector, and charities. You know how many charities sell in Western capitals the land of the Palestinians in the West Bank? And then, of course, banks, supply chains, pension funds. Pension funds are the most horrible because this is the savings that would go to people in this part of the world. Pension funds invest in the occupied Palestinian territory. So all these actors have to be held accountable. And how to change the narrative? Again, I have no way to comment. No authority to comment on the reality in Israel. Gershon will be better placed than I do. But I want to say something, because I really think that this is part of the problem. The sort of partisanism that exists, including in the pro-justice field. One thing is true, one way or another, and we can be judgmental, but I would suggest not. For the Israelis, October 7 has been something that it's a violence and a pain that will never end, and will hardly heal. And you, like me, might have the normal reaction, yeah, but what about the Palestinians? They don't see this way, because this is also a people who has been, in my view, and I say that respectfully, but indoctrinated to an ideology that has turned into a political doctrine. And therefore, I recommend everyone to be as inclusive as possible. Because especially as people who have no flesh and bones into this story, I'm Italian, I'm neither Palestinian nor Israeli, so I see my role as a bridge. And this is why I think people really don't want that I'm listened to. Because when we say solidarity is the political declination of love, this is something that scares people. This is a space that doesn't allow solidarity. This doesn't allow peace. It's just endless war. I don't want this to continue, and I hope you neither.
at the watch. We can accept 2 more questions. Please be very short, and please keep in mind we have a final discussion at the very end, so you might be able to ask your question. 2 more questions, the gentleman here in the middle, and another gentleman 3 rows behind. And then we have music, and then we go into the coffee break.
Hello. I really need to go back to the second question that was asked about what we can do here. You talked about some legal things that we can do, other political pressure. What's your feeling about the BDS movement?
Feeling is a nice way to put it. I hope you don't mind, I'll give a legal assessment.
And then the other question, ja, der Herr 3 Reihen weiter etwa. Ja. So.
Signora Albanese, thank you very much for being here and being the voice of justice for everybody, especially the Palestinians. And excuse please the behavior of my former alma mater, Ludwig Maximilian University. Right now we have a ceasefire, thank God, but we also see violations of these agreements, especially West Jordanland, and Israel keeps on bombing other areas that they see fit. Do you think the ceasefire will hold, or is this another strategy to continue this war?
BDS, for those who don't know it, is a largely Palestinian-led movement aiming to boycott, calling for a boycott, divest, and sanctions against Israel, and is a movement that started after the political inaction, after the ICJ advisory opinion declaring the illegality of the wall, and so that the wall should be dismantled. Nothing happened. And because of that, some Palestinian civil society and others have joined, have created this movement, which is very active, and it's causing, as far as the dissent, quite significant economic damage to Israel by putting pressure on various actors, including political actors, so that they do not buy from and sell to the occupation. I think it's quite natural that ordinary citizens disgruntled with the current state of affairs resort to boycott, as it was. Look, in South Africa it was not different. It's not that apartheid collapsed because member states started taking action. If they were the last ones, because the first one, for years, where citizens like you and couldn't do anything like that, but if it was not a special rapporteur, I would engage in this, because it's just ordinary citizenship, ordinary citizens' work. You choose whom to vote and whom not to vote, including by buying, actually, very much by buying or not buying. And so, I think it's fine. Special rapporteurs have a very, very clear position on the BDS, defending it as a form of freedom of expression and freedom of association, and while being criminalized in a number of jurisdictions, when taken to court, BDS wins. And the most important part for me of the BDS is actually the most important parts, without dismissing the first one, is the second, divestment. Private and public actors must divest from the occupation, and not as a moral act, not as an act of charity, but as a legal obligation, because aiding and assisting, including collaborating with an unlawful endeavor, is prohibited under international law and leads to consequences. This is why I was mentioning courts, because the consequences should be there both for the government, and some of the crimes that Israel has committed entail criminal liability, so individuals can be held accountable, as you can see from the ICC, which is finally indicted two Israeli leaders, and I hope that many others will, because I'm really shocked that there is no indictment for the architects of the extended colonization, even after that in 2023, the current government coalition announced as a policy, as a government policy, the annexation of large swaths of the West Bank. And the ceasefire. No, you said you expressed regrets for your alma mater's position. Did you write to your alma mater? Did you make your voice heard? You see? So thank you for the regrets, but thank you. Now we really don't get it. We really don't get it what action means, because we are privileged and we are lazy, and many of us have never had to struggle for anything. And we will miss human rights very much when we will not have them anymore. And it will be ceasefire. I guess more Palestinians are asking, which ceasefire? Because let me say something that I should have said before, but while the fire is not ceased in Gaza, but at the same time it has allowed people to breathe, to go back to their homes, the Israelis, some Israeli hostages to return, and some Palestinian hostages to also return. Excuse me, the children detained by an unlawful occupation, we should really not call them detainees. So they have been held by an unlawful occupation. Of course there were Palestinians who have committed crimes. Of course. And we should really distinguish according to international law what crimes are international crimes, because attacking a soldier in occupied territory is not necessary. It's a tragedy, but it's not a crime. As a state has the right to defend itself when attacked, so have the people the right to resist when attacked, and again. I'm just saying that because this is international law, because the right to life is not an absolute right. And when you embark on combat actions, if you are a resistant or if you are a soldier and you are killed in combat, this is a tragedy, but this is not a crime. However, in the context of the ceasefire, Israel has intensified the apocalyptic violence that it has used against the Palestinians in the West Bank. Because while in 12 months, from October 2023 to October 24, 700 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. And 10,000 have been arrested and detained, most of them without charge or trial, including children. 600 children, in the last 20 years, an average of 600 children per year, until 2023, then the number went up, have been detained. Many of them, 40% of them, up to an average of 30 days in solitary confinement. This is brutal. And then you say, why the Palestinians don't automatically love the Israelis? I'm not justifying that. I'm just saying, well, the occupation is ugly and generates resistance. So the best way that Israel has to protect its citizens is to get out of the occupied Palestinian territory and leave it. And so the ceasefire has brought more violence and havoc on the West Bank, because the same practices that we have seen in Gaza are now being replicated in the occupied Palestinian territory. The destruction of the refugee camps, the forced displacement, entire cities have been bombed by airplanes and artillery on the ground. And there is only one thing that explains what is happening to the West Bank. Destruction, intentional destruction, so that the people cannot live there. So that member states will be, like my own government, will be able to say, but look at Gaza, it's destroyed, it cannot be a state anymore, and the same will happen with the West Bank. So this is why I'm saying the obligation in the faces of genocide is not just to punish, is to stop, and even before, to prevent it. So our member states, yours like mine, have already failed doing that.
Francesca, nochmal, thank you very, very, very much. And we are glad that you are still with us for further discussion later on. The music will give us some time to reflect on the homework you have given us. Und dann 15 Minuten Pause. And then we go into a 15 minutes break after the music.